thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Events, programs, and student activities.
All the factors are useful.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, at the top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning shows we've aired previously on Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great idea for topics, guests, and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. After all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on HCC TV, now proudly in its 29th season. We have a great show lined up for you today. It's a friend of mine who I've been trying to actually get on Dialogue Houston for a while, but timing is everything. We are all living through still this pandemic. We're still on the back throes, hopefully, of COVID-19. Things will be opening up, hopefully again soon, when it's ready, when the health tells us it's time to do it and not before. And we hope that everyone can kind of regain their lives. Well, my guest that I'm having introduce himself and tell you about his great career is one who's dealt with the students who've gone through all of this. The students who have really suffered with the stress, the anxiety, and all that plagues this. But through his work with the students, he's learned great things that we can apply to us as adults, how to cope, how to deal with stress, how to deal with anxiety. And none other than my guest today is none other than Floyd Robinson. And I'll let Floyd tell you everything. I'm not going to even mention his connection to the University of Houston, because his story alone is one that is really worth hearing about, in the way he wove all his disciplines, his passions for energy and for life into a career. Floyd, is all yours.
Larry, I thank you so very much. And I want to publicly apologize for making every excuse possible not to ever appear on your show. But I tell you, it was not personal, not in any way. In fact, I'm very honored to be with you today. And again, I thank you, and I thank you for your tenacity. I have been at the University of Houston. I am now retired from there after 25 years. I began my career at the University of Houston as the director of the Student Health Center some many years ago, after having a career as an administrator at both MD Anderson Hospital and also at the Memorial Hermann Hospital in the medical, both of them in the medical center. So healthcare has always been a keen interest of mine. When I went to the University of Houston, as I said, my first job there was the director of the health center. And it was a very exciting job for me personally, because it involved working with students, and students have always been my main focus. I've always wanted to know how to help students, how to do more for students. I first experienced working with students in my very first career ever after undergraduate school. I was a teacher at a private boarding school in Pennsylvania, and I taught English there for some 7 years. So I really began my dedication for students, I think, at that boarding school, because it was a boarding school and you had to be on call 24/7. So I always felt that I could do more, should do more. And so that, I think, is probably where my first love began. So getting to the University of Houston for me was really exciting. And every time I've taken on a new job, I've always had the philosophy that I should sit back and observe for a couple of months before I made any changes in anything, because I wanted to make sure that the employees were comfortable with me, but also that the employees could learn a bit about my philosophy. And my philosophy has always been that whatever organization I was joining, the services would be open and available to everyone and anyone. And as you can imagine, being at the University of Houston, opening the services to anyone and everyone meant thousands of students. And that was my main intent. And I was fortunate in that I was able to do most of the things that I wanted to do within the health center. Unfortunately, when I arrived, I noticed that we did not have a solid psychiatric care available to our students. And I thought that was one thing that was sorely needed. So that was the first thing that I addressed. And again, I was given permission to bring in psychiatry. It was interesting how that happened. You know, when you introduce something new, and especially at a university the size of University of Houston, there were some, you know, pitfalls that I had to deal with, and some barriers that I had to overcome. But permission was finally granted to bring in a part-time psychiatrist. Needless to say, that part-time psychiatrist's schedule filled up pretty quickly, and it necessitated bringing in not only a full-time, but 2 full-time psychiatrists. And I think we were one of the first universities in the country to bring in psychiatry. In fact, when I met with my colleagues at our national conventions, I was often you know, accused of being a troublemaker, because they said, you know, you brought in psychiatry, and now we're having to bring in psychiatry because our students want it. And I must say that was one of the things that, although I got some criticism for it, it is one of the things that has become very popular on university campuses. Students have challenges. It's funny, whenever I've been asked to talk years ago, because I'm now retired from the university after 25 years, but years ago when I was asked to go around and talk about the need, people would say to me, well, what do students need psychiatric care? Are they stressed out? Are they concerned about, you know, love relationships? And it's far deeper than that. I mean, our students come to us from our communities, and they come with some of the same maladies that people in the community have. I mean, we have students with bipolar concerns, manic depressive concerns, and many of these students, and I commend their parents, because their parents had seen to it early on that they were getting psychiatric care, and when they get to the university, that care should indeed be offered and extended to them. So we opened our health center to psychiatric care for those patients, or students rather, who desired it. We also opened a men's clinic. Typically men, and I think, Larry, you would agree with this, typically men, we are not given all the information that is so readily available to women about healthcare and things that they should know about, and things that they should be looking at, and how to care for themselves. Well, we as men don't get that privilege.
Nope.
And, you know, I used to tell people, I would always ask the question when I would give lectures, I would say, and especially when I would speak to an all-female group, I said, you know, my advice to you as women is to marry a guy who is much older, because we as men still tend to die 7 years earlier than women. And I'm thinking, we need to be as smart as you are so that we can live as long as you live. So I thought it was important to have a men's clinic. And again, there was some reluctance about it, because, you know, you were told, well, men aren't going to take advantage of that. And if they come to the clinic, it's only going to be for sexually related matters. Well, it was not the case. Men came to us to learn how to control anger, for example, how to stay healthy, what they should be doing on a yearly basis, you know, as far as getting a physical examination. And it just became a matter of educating young men, especially young university men, about things that they should be doing for themselves on a yearly basis. I was also able to introduce dental care. I mean, amazing that, you know, when you were growing up, you were taken to a dentist at least once a year. But then when you got to the university level, dental care was just something that you didn't really, you know, concern yourself about. But we actually brought a dentist into the health center, so we made dental care readily available for them. So being at the university for me was a great treat. As I said, I began as the director, and thanks to Dr. Richard Walker, who is still the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at the University of Houston, Richard asked me to take the first position as the Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs, specifically over the areas of health and wellness. So I had those areas of health and wellness that really could focus in on the students. And one of the big things was talking about the wellness of our student body. And that include mental health, physical health, well-being, physical well-being. It also involved the recreation center, which meant we were focused on the physical exercises and what we could recommend for various and sundry students if they were concerned about weight loss. And that, of course, was an obvious marriage, because if the physician, as so many times happens, the physician tells you, well, you need to lose 15 pounds. Well, how do you lose 15 pounds? The physician never tells you that. Therein lies that, well, how do I lose 15 pounds? Do I just stop eating burgers at lunch and burgers for breakfast and burgers for dinner? You combine that with an exercise program. So the recreation center was an obvious kind of fit. We also dealt with counseling and psychological services. We started a program called, it was a program for students who had challenges with addiction, be it alcohol addiction or drug addiction. And that was a very helpful program for students. And I found that any program that we offered, students were very eager to take advantage of it. And so it kind of like opened up the Pandora's box, if you will, because again, not the University of Houston so much, but there are universities and other institutions that tend to know, we identified that there was a problem, but we don't provide the service because we don't want people in the community to think, well, if they have a counseling service, they may have students who need counseling. Well, yes, all institutions do need that. So the university was a great place to begin initiating some of those nuances, and I'm happy to say that other schools have caught up, and most schools now have psychiatric care available. They have even men's clinics available to their male students, and it's worked.
Well, that is wonderful introduction, and I thank you. Let me back up a little bit. So starting with your, to paraphrase John Lewis, you started good trouble when you went to the conferences and talked about what students needed, particularly in bringing on psychology and psychiatry to the campus. How hard is it still, though, to talk about mental health issues? It seems still to be the challenge, the taboo in some ways, and particularly men. When you mention men, we're the stubbornest, hard-headed people on the face of the earth.
Yes.
We don't like to talk about our conditions and illness. We don't like to admit we have anything. We're strong, macho, and we're going to get through it one way or the other. That's just not true anymore, though. You can't do it alone.
It's not true, Larry. And sad to say, unfortunately, it's still universally, mental health is still universally a taboo issue. I'm still doing on my own, I'm still going out and I accept invitations to go out and talk to members of the community especially regarding mental health issues, men's health issues. And it's funny, when I introduce men's health, I always tie in the mental health as well. And at the end of my presentations, I always ask, are there any questions? And of course, there may be one or two brave men who will raise their hands and ask a question. But at the close of my presentation, when I'm packing up and ready to leave, invariably, I will find a line of typically men, and they can be anywhere from 5 to 10 men who are waiting to ask me privately a question about mental health. And it's about, I don't handle this very well. I do find that I get very angry easily. I tend to want to hit. Do I need something? When I get upset, I tend to drink a 6-pack as opposed to drinking 1 or 2. And we talk about those issues. But mental health is something that is so prominent in our society. And yet it's something that we all fear. Sadly, in Texas, we don't have nearly the availability of mental health care that we should have and that we deserve to have, not only in our city, but in our state. We're lacking. I noticed yesterday even before yesterday, when I listened to the police reforms that we are about to enjoy here in our city, they're talking about, an officer traveling with someone from mental health.
Oh, yes. Very important component.
It is absolutely essential. It is absolutely essential. Otherwise, we're going to continue down that dark path without really caring for that individual who is experiencing mental health challenges, and it's very real, and it's a very big part of our
so much
community.
of the mental health issues when it comes to policing is the ability to have that person on site to be able
Yes.
that whole process of de-escalating.
Yes.
Let's take a step or two back. Let's assess what's going on here. And most of the time it does have mental health components and issues. I want to go back to something else you said, though, about access to information, access to for men and for others. How much does poverty play into this? The inability to have access?
I think poverty is a component, Larry, but I must also be candid and say that race is a major component.
Well, I meant poverty. Yes, poverty and race to me go together. Yes.
Yeah. It's a big issue. It is a big issue, and it's not one that we are always so very, very transparent about. We would have, and again, I harken back to my days at the university, since that's the most recent employment. We would have students who would, for example, not be able to afford to come in and pay, and our rates, our charges rather, were so very, very low, and they were intentionally kept low so that we could allow students, any student, to come in. And even some students who were asked to pay $5 and $10, that was a challenge for them. And in every instance, I made certain that that patient received care. I remember one young man came in and he said, I can't even afford $10. And he was actually trying to access our psychiatry care. And he said, but my grandparents live on a farm and I live on the farm with them. And he said, but if I bring eggs into you periodically, will that help pay the bill? I have to confess, I never accepted his eggs, but I wanted to make sure that he had access to care. We have so many times in our healthcare units here, both within our city and within our universities, students who can't afford it, people who cannot afford healthcare. I live in the heart of downtown Houston, and I see on a daily basis some of the most challenging, I call them my brothers and sisters because indeed they are my brothers and sisters, but I see some of the most challenging brothers and sisters in downtown Houston who are here struggling. And I think they struggle because they've not always had, access to care, and they can't afford it. Granted, there are some who have chosen to do whatever it is they have done that may have contributed to their being on the street, but even that, they don't have the wherewithal because they can't afford it. It's not available to them. And so sadly, they get in, to situations which allow them to live on the streets and only on the streets. But I think being a minority and not having the funds, that it certainly does contribute to the fact that we don't have access. And when you go into a hospital, when you go in to see a physician, that physician sees you as being someone who, you don't have health insurance, and you don't have the wherewithal to pay, so I'm going to give you as little as I can give you about preventing this in the future. I was once, for example, a personal story. I was once offered to serve as the director of a cardiac unit here at one of our major hospitals. And I knew the physician who ran that cardiac unit. And he talked with me several times about, why don't you take the job with me? You would be the director of this unit, blah, blah, blah. And I said to him, because my focus comes from education. I would want to teach that patient how to avoid being on your table, how to avoid getting a triple bypass, quadruple bypass.
More proactive.
And his comment to me was shocking, Larry. His comment to me was, do you realize how many years it took me to become a cardiac surgeon? and I said to him, we were at dinner, and I said to him, this is why you and I could never work well together, because I come from an educational point of view, and all you want is to crack that chest open. And so yes, the poverty does indeed affect, because they don't get the education. I related to what's going on presently with the COVID vaccines. again, looking at our city, where is the vaccine needed? It's needed, of course, everywhere. But why did we not begin, with this population? Again, living downtown, I see, that there are food banks, and I see that there are food trucks, not terribly far from our city library. There is an organization. They come there, I think, every week at 7.
Yes, they do.
7 p.m. And they are feeding people, and that line is very, very long. I'm a member of Christ Church Cathedral. We have the beacon at Christ Church Cathedral. And early on, I kept thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if the vaccine could be taken to them? They are there every week to get food, every evening to get food. Maybe set up the vaccine for them.
Exactly.
And, cover that. But because they don't have access to news, because they don't have access to the warnings, they miss out. And they miss out on quite a bit, not only with COVID vaccine, but other health issues as well.
I want to pivot with you in the time we have remaining a little bit, because you and I share some things in common. The spirituality piece of all of this.
Yes.
You've been a member of Christ Church for many, many years. You've been on the vestry. I belonged way back to time to St. Stephen's in the Montrose and was on the vestry there for years.
Yes.
Also, what I was struck when COVID came is that the governor's decree of closing churches, church, parish, temple, synagogue, and mosque, closing houses of worship, to me was just something wrong with it. Now I understand the health reasons why, but I also understand there should have been a way to still have that happen with social distancing. And at the same time, we deem liquor stores as essential and remained open. And so the thing that struck me about mental health, about domestic abuse, about all those things that have been on the rise since COVID, that the coping mechanisms that we need for many human beings are not found in that bottle. They're found in a different arena altogether.
Yes.
And to not have ability to access that arena and to make oneself available to that arena, I think did an irreparable harm and damage. And I think we're still trying to come out of that, and will be for some time, because what I have seen from talking to adults who've been underfoot of each other for some now a year and a half almost, who've never spent this much time with each other in their own household, husbands and wives, who have said to me that I have gotten more abusive than I ever thought I would be. She has gotten more abusive than she ever thought she would be. And what we used to do when we got that way before COVID, even got close to being that way with each other, we would go pray together.
Yes.
We would go to the physical space known as the church, parish, temple, synagogue, and mosque. Now we know you don't need that physical space to pray, but nonetheless, that's part of the conditioning of the mind to put one in that posture. And so it has been an interesting thing to see how all of this is played in a sense against the human being and the psyche.
Yes.
To give them the tools they need. Just quickly, your thoughts on that, Floyd, before we have to end this today.
And I think that's so very critical. And I can tell you from personal experience, the one thing that we began doing early on at our cathedral, we had a designated person, and they were assigned maybe 8 to 10 parishioners. And they would call those parishioners to ask, how are you doing? It was a welfare check via phone.
Right.
And if that parishioner indicated that they were in need of, as you're saying, someone to talk with, specifically someone to pray with, they were then put in touch with either a member of the congregation or with a priest. But there was care given. We now have a line that you can call. And if you are in need of any kind of assistance, that telephone is answered 24/7 and care is offered to you. But you are absolutely right. The one, for people of faith, that one bastion of reality, if you will, of spirituality, was immediately taken away from us. Churches were locked. They were padlocked, and you couldn't get into that one place that was your not only your spiritual home, but I also think for many people it was the actual place where you could be revitalized. But to have that contact removed, to have that assistance removed, has caused many families to disintegrate. I'm sad to say, but I think what happens in churches, any institution of faith, they need to have a service that allows for that individual to still have contact, be it a phone call,
Yep.
be it a prayer circle. And prayer circles have become very popular. I have a friend who lives in far north Houston, and she said never ever did she think that she would be looking forward to a Wednesday evening 7 p.m. phone call. But they get on the phone, those who don't have Zoom, and they get on the phone every Wednesday at 7, and now they've extended it to Saturday morning at 10, from 10 to 11, and they collectively pray for those in need. Because our church doors have been, and many of them are still closed to us. But that spirituality has helped in so many instances. But to begin that, and if churches are not doing it yet, they certainly need to start doing that, calling on your parishioners, especially those who have concerns. And I can promise you, there are more people now who have concerns than you could ever possibly imagine.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. Our time always goes too quickly. We're almost at that point, but here's the thought I've had as we've been talking and listening to and with each other this afternoon. I'll follow up with you on this. We need to put a panel together, you and I and perhaps 3 other people, and we'll extend it to an hour, and we'll have a dialogue on a lot of the issues we've talked about, particularly as it pertains not only for students but to adults as we go forward.
Yes.
And I'm going to couch it in this manner as we go forward in this post-George Floyd reality.
Yes.
And all the issues that go with that, because police reform is a great start. But here's what I'm learning about police reform. Police reform is really society's reform.
Yes.
The way we get at a lot of the issues we've chosen not to deal with, which we wanted not to deal with, is through police reform. Because policing and the history of policing is what has gotten us in some of the mess that we're in now. And the other part of it is, of course, when we talked about poverty and race, when persons of color were only deemed 3/5 of a person, of a human being in the Constitution, all that trickle down stuff now, 400 years of buildup, is catching up with us.
Yes.
And so when we talk about human beings going forward, whether we're talking about the human being as a social, economic, political, or spiritual being, we have to connect all these dots.
Absolutely.
We have to do it with a group of thoughtful human beings that I know you and I can put together to look at how this needs to be done going forward.
Yes.
And I'm going to keep going back to that post-George Floyd reality. It is not the conversation we would have had a year and a half ago. It is that going forward together in this change in demographics, and particularly taking Houston into consideration with the change in demographics, how much that impacts what we're going to do or not do.
Absolutely.
All right, my brother, I'll give you 30 seconds and we got to get out of here. Give us a close.
Larry, I apologize for not ever being available in the previous time, but as you have just ended by saying going forward, if and when you ever need me to come back, and I hope that you will put this panel together and that you will allow me to be a part of it. Going forward, I am there with you, and I thank you so very much.
And thank you, Floyd, for always being there for me. Thank you for your prayers and support as I've done my journey with my health issues. I cannot thank you enough, brother, and look forward to working with you and going forward.
My prayers will continue for you.
All right.
Much love to you, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is our show for today. We're going to pick up with this theme and other themes related to this going forward. It is that time, for such a time as this, when we must raise these issues and have these conversations and dialogue. They're critical conversations. What makes a conversation critical? It is because it is the time to have it. It is critical because we're all in this together. We have to figure out our common destiny together, figure out our future together. We're going to have to do it in a way that allows us to dig into the humanity of each human being and to pull from the wellspring of who we are deep in the recesses of our being and understand that human beings need to flourish, not just survive, not just thrive. It's about human flourishing. We need to do everything we can to help each human being flourish to the fullest of their God-given potential. I got to get out of here. It's time to go. Great to be with you as always. Stay safe, be well, and until next time, peace, power, and love.